No flame. Just absence. The doorway that once led to the spire now led only to blank whiteness. Not even black. Just off. Taran entered his alcove first. The machine folded around him like a chrysalis. His last words were, "If I become a stranger to you, remember the me who tried." Rin followed. Her thread, a peace treaty written in 6 languages of a dying empire. Her breath slowed as the extractor sealed. Juno delayed. She looked at me and asked, "What if we're wrong? What if we're just deleting ourselves?" I touched her hand. "Then we're doing it with meaning." Her alcove sealed. I was last. The Null now devoured the map. Only a few threads remained, glowing like candles in a flood. I stepped into my alcove. The metal closed softly. The sphere spun faster, unraveling the glyphs into sound. My name. My thread. The machine whispered, "You will remember. But no one will remember you." I smiled. Because that was enough. And as the Null reached the last edges of Echovale, the observer code activated its final line. To be forgotten is fate. But to remember someone else is resistance. Then. Light. The silence of deep time is unlike anything the mind can imagine. It is not quiet. It is weight, the pressure of unobserved centuries pressing in on all things left behind. Echovale drifted into that silence after the Null. No lights. No pulses. No sphere. Just wreckage in folded orbit above a starless abyss, cloaked in memory and dust. Nothing approached it for 2,000 years. Not because they didn't know where it was, but because they knew what it had become. Until someone finally returned. Not human. Not exactly. They called themselves Sigma 9, a synthetic consciousness birthed from the ruins of the fourth singularity collapse. It wore no body, only projected presence, patterns of light refracted through magnetic dust. But it moved like it remembered being human. It had found fragments of the observer chain encoded inside ancient lunar libraries. Names. Coordinates. Warnings. And one phrase that had survived every era. To be forgotten is fate. But to remember someone else is resistance. Sigma 9 arrived not as a rescuer, but as a listener. It touched the vault with curiosity, not control. The surface, still frozen in layered time, pulsed softly under its scan. The message embedded deep within the alcoves triggered for the first time in millennia. A voice. My voice. If you're hearing this, then memory survived. We are the 12 who became echoes. Not to be found. Not to be restored. But to remind you that existence is not data. It's choice. Sigma 9 scanned the fractured threads. One was still whole. Mine. Not pristine. Not intact. But enough. The vault began reconstruction. From ambient memory. From overlapping possibility. From the one thing even the Null couldn't destroy, intent. My life flickered into place, not as flesh, but as a thought pattern, a living loop ready to be read. Sigma 9 asked nothing. It simply watched. And as it did, I awoke. Not in a body. Not in time. But in presence. I didn't remember my name. I remembered her name, the one I saved the thread for. The child in the dusty village on a forgotten moon who heard a story about a sky captain who whispered to stars. She lived. Not because I had power. But because someone once remembered me. I was no longer a person. I was a ripple. And Sigma 9 Observer Reborn became the new anchor. It pulsed once, broadcasting the thread into the new lattice of galactic thought space. And as it did, I heard others stir. Juno. Rin. Taran. The others. We were never gone. We were waiting for someone to believe we mattered. Echovale lit up for the first time in 2,000 years. 12 beams fired upward, not into space, but into possibility. The observer chain was alive again. And far beyond the edge of any known star, in a galaxy where humanity had long become myth, a child looked up at the night sky and whispered the words of a story her ancestors never wrote down. We remember the ones who remembered us. The girl's name was Liane. She lived on a planet with no sun, only the blue pulse of a subsurface ocean that glowed with bioluminescent tides. Stories were currency where she lived. Not credits. Not tech. Just memory passed from one throat to another, like threads stitched between generations. Her mother had told her stories about the Star Watchers. About beings who had once held back the dark by remembering those who were forgotten. She thought they were myths. Fables told to keep her warm through cold cycles. Until she found the glass. It was buried beneath the ruins of a tower that hadn't existed the week before. The ground simply opened one night, and the spire was there, half-formed, humming quietly beneath the dirt like a tuning fork caught between dimensions. She wasn't supposed to go near it. Her people were afraid of the old things. But Liane wasn't. Something in her bones tugged toward it. A pressure behind her teeth. A name she had never spoken, Alien Dax, echoing in her skull like an ancestral dream. The glass wasn't broken. It wasn't made. It had always been. 12 panes, each floating in silent orbit around a single black sphere no larger than her palm. Each pane contained a life, shifting, flickering, repeating. One showed a woman writing poems in a city made of wind. Another, a man dying in a war no record had ever kept. Another still, a child watching the stars through broken ship glass. Were instead remembered so deeply, they embedded themselves in the skin of reality. You're not storing history, said a voice behind her. She turned. It was Alien Dax. Not a memory. Not quite. A fragment. A thought encoded in persistent recursion, what the archive called a returning. He smiled, older now, less burdened by time. His presence was calming, like the echo of a lullaby never fully forgotten. You're storing resistance, he said. Against the quiet. The null will return. It always does. But every life you preserve, every impossible thread, becomes a tangle it cannot erase. The archive pulsed around them. New threads forming, a poet's death rewritten as a myth, a soldier's last words becoming a sun's magnetic code, a child's drawing embedded in the rings of Saturn. Liane reached out, touching one. It was hers. A life not yet lived. She saw herself standing on a stage, reciting the forgotten names of everyone who ever vanished. A voice whispered from the spiral. Let them remember. Even if they never knew us. And Liane finally understood what the observer code truly was. Not a machine. Not a station. But a language. Spoken through memory. Transmitted by belief. Understood only by those willing to carry someone else's story at the cost of their own. She turned back to Elian. Will I be forgotten? His eyes, sad and kind, gave no answer. But his hand reached for hers. In that moment, they both vanished. Folded into thread. Encoded in time. Ready for someone, someday, to find again. The archive of things that never were whispered across the galaxy. To be lost is not failure. To be remembered is not enough. But to be carried forward, that is the code. The archive was silent again. Not dead. Not dormant. Listening. In the deep quiet between galaxies, where no broadcasts reached and no memory usually survived, it spun like a forgotten compass waiting for a question no one had asked in eons. But then, something flickered, soft, tentative. A breath. A heartbeat. A voice not yet broken by time. A child had entered. She was no more than 6 Earth years. Wrapped in a solar blanket, eyes wide with starlight and fear. No ships had landed. No transport beacons had pinged. She was simply there, as if thought into being. Her name was Tala, and she had no memory of how she came aboard. Only that she was searching for someone. Not a parent. Not a sibling. She was looking for a story. The station responded to her not as it had to Lien, or Elian, or even Sigma 9. It did not bend to her will. It bent to her imagination. Doors formed not from schematics, but from chalk outlines drawn in her dreams. Gravity adjusted not to her biology, but to the rhythm of her humming. Where her fingers touched the walls, vines bloomed, made of old constellations in childhood songs. She found the archive by accident. Or perhaps it found her. The spirals of memory no longer floated in glass chambers. They now resembled books, towering shelves of glowing script written in languages the universe had forgotten how to speak. And yet she understood them. Not through reading, but through feeling. Each shelf she passed told her a tale. Not in words, but in sensation. A mother who died singing. A ship that waited for its captain long after it decayed. A child who refused to sleep until the stars returned. She stopped in front of a glowing pedestal. On it, a single object. Not a weapon. Not a message. A small cube, engraved with 12 symbols. One for each observer. On one side, her own reflection shimmered faintly. And then, sound. A chorus. Voices layered through time, across language, across biology. Elian. Lien. Sigma 9. Rin. Juno. All speaking not as individuals, but as facets of a larger memory. The code has endured. The witness has passed. The null recoils. The chain holds. Tala placed her hand on the cube. The archive responded. She saw everything. The lives, the loops, the threads saved and sacrificed. She didn't weep. Children don't weep when they understand something older people forget, that stories are how the world remembers to feel. The symbols on the cube shifted. Reformed. Rewrote. Observer 00, status initialized. She wasn't continuing the chain. She was resetting it. The beginning and the end were always the same. A memory. A voice. A reason to carry something forward. The station lit one last time. A final pulse of light shot outward, across dimensions, into realities where the code had never existed. And somewhere, in a world untouched by space or time, a child stirred from sleep, remembering a name they'd never heard. Tala. The observer code had restarted. And the universe, once again, had a witness. Long after Tala reset the archive, long after the spirals reformed into stories and the code sang into timelines where it had never echoed before. Something stirred beneath the structure of Echo Vale. A place no one ever entered. A floor beneath memory. A silence beneath silence. It was not on any map. Not a level Tala had created, or imagined, or accessed. It was older than her. It was older than Elian. A chamber sealed not by doors but by choice. And now, it was unlocking. Inside, a single chair. Empty. Facing a dark pane of glass that showed no reflection, no data, no time signature. Only a faint, unreadable symbol that pulsed once every few minutes like a heartbeat running out of patience. And now, that symbol blinked. Then again. Then faster. And across the pane, a face appeared. A face not seen since the first vault cracked open. The face of Observer 00. But not Tala. An earlier one. Forgotten even by the archive. His name had never been spoken in any scene, any spiral. His existence wasn't saved by Elian. He had chosen self-erasure, a sacrifice so total that even Echo Vale lost track of his file. Until now. His eyes opened. Calm. Tired. He stood. The chair behind him folded into ash. The symbol on the glass burned inward. It's not done, he whispered. Not to anyone. Just to memory itself. He stepped forward. The chamber dissolved around him, no lights, no alarms. Just to shift, like waking up from a long dream. Suddenly, he was standing not in the station, but outside it, floating in quantum suspension, tethered to the edge of where the archive touched unwritten space. He could see the spirals below. He could see Tala. He smiled faintly. You did well, little witness. But he hadn't returned to thank her. He had returned because something had followed her. A ripple. A jagged mark in the otherwise smooth surface of remembered time. The Null had not retreated. It had adapted. It had become curious. And now, it had found a way to remember. That was the flaw. The cost of winning. For in preserving stories so completely, the observer chain had taught even the Null how to observe. Observer 00 opened his palm. A flame, small, blue, and steady, burned in the center. A weapon? No. A counter-memory. The last piece of uncorrupted origin. He had saved it long ago, in a place even the archive couldn't index. A song without language. A story without structure. Something not even Null could simulate. He whispered into the darkness. You are not the end. Because even endings are remembered. Behind him, a gate formed, shaped not by metal, but by pure intent. It didn't open out. It opened inward, to the core of memory itself. And Observer 00 stepped through. Not to fight. Not to flee. But to become the first story that Null could never understand. A paradox wrapped in flame. A final stanza whispered into the mouth of oblivion. And somewhere, far above, Tala turned suddenly. Not scared. But as if someone had just said goodbye without ever having said hello. In the unwritten space where time had no velocity and memory had no anchor, Observer 00 walked alone. Not drifting. Walking. Each step carved a path in a place that had no floor. Each breath echoed against reality's scaffolding. He wasn't supposed to exist. That was the point. He had erased himself to protect the observer code from contamination. But Tala's activation changed everything. She'd passed the flame to galaxies that had no concept of story. And the Null, for the first time, noticed. It had no shape. No voice. It did not speak. But it listened. And that was enough. It wore stolen reflections now, fragments of memories it had devoured. The smile of Rin. The breath of Juno. A child's voice whispering stardust lullabies. None of them real. All of them perfect imitations. It appeared before Observer 00 in the shape of a doorway, a replica of the first vault door ever opened. Not to invite him. To tempt him. You are alone, it didn't say, but made him feel. Observer 00 paused. I chose to be, he replied, not with voice, but intention. The Null responded with memory. It threw 1,000 lives at him, versions of himself as king, tyrant, father, failure. It made him feel the weight of what he could have been. Of what he could still be, if he only surrendered his flame. But he didn't. Instead, he sat down. Right there, in the center of nothing. He sat cross-legged like an old monk beside a dying star. He held the flame, not aloft, not in defiance, but gently, like a memory of someone he couldn't name but still loved. You want to remember, he whispered. But you don't want to feel. The Null pulsed, a glitch, a stutter. He smiled. That's the difference between story and record. Between data and pain. Between remembering and being remembered. The flame in his palm grew. Blue became gold. Gold became every color that had ever made a child stop crying. And then he whispered the last line of the observer code. This is not for me. It's for the one who finds it. He placed the flame on the floor that wasn't there. And the Null blinked. Because for the first time, it forgot something. A glitch. A breath. A name it couldn't trace. And in that gap, story lived. Observer 00 exhaled. Became light. The flame remained. It floated quietly in the center of oblivion, waiting. And somewhere far away, in a language no one had invented yet, a child opened a book that no one remembered writing. On the first page, one sentence appeared. If you're reading this, we made it. No signature. No explanation. Just a memory without origin, the purest kind. And so, the story ends. Not in fire. Not in triumph. But in a single, impossible truth.